Hi everyone, Farmer Dean from Tingletown Gardens, and today I'm going to show you a really simple way to produce a lot of your own plants right in your own home. So we're in our production greenhouse where we'll produce 100,000 or more these little cuttings a year, but I'm going to show you how you can do it at home. So today I just want to show you a very simple at-home technique and method that you can use to propagate some of your own plants. For me, propagating plants are is probably the most rewarding horticultural thing you can do. You're basically taking a mother plant and making babies from it, and it's quite honestly the very thing that got me interested in horticulture back when I was a college student, and made me switch my major eventually and go into horticulture. And it's just such an amazing phenomenon. So it can also be very stressful. When you try to propagate something, especially those things that are a little bit harder to propagate and they don't work, it can be a little bit demoralizing at times. But this technique is really foolproof. It works easy and wonderful on the easy to root things, and also works quite well on some of the more difficult things to root. So okay, so first let's make the contraption that we're going to use to root our plants. In a commercial greenhouse, just like you see behind me, what we're really trying to do is just keep the humidity up and basically keep the plant tissue alive during the time that the plant is making its new roots so that it can support itself. In here, we have a very high-tech mist system that goes on for 10 seconds every 10 minutes throughout the entire day, which keeps this very thin little film of mist on the leaf surface, which is what keeps it alive. So you can also overdo that. If you get too much water on it, you can actually cause them to rot. Many things root quite well just by putting them in a jar or in a bottle of water and letting them root that way. But the challenge with that and some of the more hard to root things is that you don't have enough oxygen, you don't have enough air. In this system, we've got plenty of oxygen, which is very necessary for rooting, but you also have plenty of moisture and humidity. So I'm going to show you in a minute what that is. Now, keep in mind, it is 85 degrees in here, and it's very hot, so I may be wiping some sweat off my brow as we do this. So, okay, so what do you need? So the first thing is a really simple, basic terracotta pot. And you need some vermiculite to put in that pot. This is just straight 100% vermiculite filled from the top to the bottom. I would recommend putting a saucer underneath this once you locate it in your house, wherever that ends up being, and just to keep and protect any furniture or anything that might otherwise get water on. Because this pot, you want to make sure that there is a drainage hole. You don't want to ever get excess moisture buildup in here, because again, we want to maintain that air level. The second thing you will need is a very small terracotta pot. And this has to be straight terracotta. It can't be glazed, it can't be sealed up in any way, because we're going to rely on this pot, basically this terracotta, because terracotta will let moisture permeate through it, which is exactly what we want. However, we need to plug the hole in the bottom. So as you can see in this one, I simply took a pencil eraser, a piece of rubber, and I turned it into that hole to plug it up. You can also use some hot melt glue. You can use basically a rubber stopper that you would get at the hardware store, but just something to seal the bottom of that up. So what we're going to do is we've got our vermiculite, and I've already kind of made a hole where this pot is going to go. And we're going to just kind of press that down into the vermiculite so that it's basically level on the top. Then we're going to take just some plain old water, and we're going to fill that center pot up. Now, I've already pre-soaked the vermiculite on the outside. You want to water that in and soak that in really good before doing this. You don't want to rely on this water to water that in for the very first time. You're better off just filling it up. So now we've got a pot with vermiculite, we've got a substrate to hold the plant, and then we have a moisture vessel or a humidity vessel. The last thing that we're going to use, and I just took a very simple glass bowl, we want to let light in, but we don't want to let a lot of light in. Make sure you don't ever set this in any window or any space in your home that's going to get direct sunlight. It will get way too hot in there. You want to keep it warm, but you don't want it to get excessively hot. So indirect light is always going to be best. And we want a bowl that's going to seat over the top of this pot so that we essentially create a humidity chamber. Now, I had a professor in college that called this a forsyth pot, and I suppose by some technical definition that might be what it is. Call it what you want, but essentially we're making a fancy humidity chamber. If you don't have a pot and a glass bowl that happen to marry up perfectly, you can also just take some pencils and use them essentially as wedges or props, and then take any kind of a clear plastic bag and put that over the top. You just want to make sure that you're keeping the plastic or the covering from touching the leaf surface. You want to keep it open so airflow can move and not rest right on the plants themselves. So, okay, so now we have our pot basically made up. So now what we need to do is we need to get some cuttings. So there's kind of some very simple do's and don'ts of cuttings. A lot of times we think that very tip and that very newest growth is the best. Usually it is not. This tissue has not really fully developed yet. It's in that process. And if we take that tissue, some things will root, but I usually recommend not using that real soft, supple growth out on the tip. Instead, we want to find tissue that's a little bit more developed, a little bit more mature, because it will have a better chance of creating those roots out the bottom that we need. So in the case of this ivy, I'm going to get in here, and I'm going to take this little side shoot, basically, which it doesn't have to be huge, but that tiny little cutting is about a perfect little ivy cutting. Then I usually recommend using a rooting hormone. You can get liquid versions, you can get powdered versions or talc versions. Any one is beneficial, because what it does, essentially we're trying to convince the plant to make new roots down at the bottom. And that takes a hormone response in the plant. So by using a rooting hormone, which is really, it's IBA, and we take the cutting and we dip it in there and we just hold it for a second or two before we then put it into the container. What that's going to do is basically some of that hormone is going to get absorbed into the plant, and it's going to encourage the response that we want in the cutting to actually form new roots. Now, why do we want to use that rooting hormone when some things will do it just fine without? Is we want to speed that process up. The sooner that we can get new roots on that cutting, the healthier and the better it's going to be. We want to get the plants out of the rooting chamber as fast as possible and get roots on them in that 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch area so that we can pot them on. So this is still a stressful environment for the plants, so we want to minimize the time in here. So anyway, so ivies are great. So in the case of something so simple as this cute little begonia, begonias in themselves can be trickier, and you can do leaf cuttings on certain begonias, some of the Rex types. That's about the only way to do them. Those are a little bit challenging, so give yourself some time and don't quit if you fail. Something is not going to work in here. Don't let that stop you. Just keep trying. So we're going to take it, put it into our rooting hormone, and we're going to stick it into our vermiculite. There's other things like string of pearls. Okay, I'm going to cut a big chunk off, but you can see that whole big thing. String of pearls are really easy to root because, as you can see, there's already little baby roots coming out. And again, this real fine little new growth, I usually cut that off. And instead, take a cutting that looks a little bit more like that. It's a chunk at the end, towards the inside of the plant, and it also has those roots already. Now you probably don't really even need rooting hormone on these, but the best thing to do with anything that is a string of pearls, string of bananas, string of hearts, is to simply take a little segment like that and lay it on the top and just gently press it into that vermiculite. You don't want to get it too deep and too buried. Remember, there's a lot of moisture stored in those leaves, and if you get that too far down and you're putting it in a very humid and moist environment, you might actually get some rot. So one of our favorite little guys, and a favorite that is pretty easy to propagate, is this little cute ruby necklace. And if you don't have one of these in your home, you need one. They're fabulous, and they're very forgiving, very tough. Again, we're going to take that cutting, we're going to stick it for just a second, and then into that vermiculite. Now, Hoyas. Hoyas are something that are generally easy to root, but they take some time and they take some practice. Again, on Hoyas, they can be a little bit interesting in the sense that they have lots and lots and lots of new growth like this often, but they don't have leaves out on these stems. So you really don't want to use these areas. However, this might not be the worst cutting. This is atypical, but you see all those little roots that are already forming, and you have this leaf. That could be a very good cutting, but what I typically like is a cutting that has a few more leaves on it. I'm going to remove a few of those leaves. We want to remove a few of the leaves because it actually reduces the amount of evaporation area that the plant has. So this is a beautiful little Hoya cutting. What's very important with all cuttings is that you want some nodes, basically the points that leaves come out of. The reason is the nodal tissue is very different than this tissue in between, and most of your roots are going to typically form at that node. So again, Hoya, I'm going to go up a little bit longer as in the time that I dip this, just to get a little bit more of that IBA and that rooting hormone in, and then I'm going to stick that cutting. So anyway, so this is such a simple way and such an easy way, and all you have to do now is keep an eye on this. By using a bowl, it's really wonderful because it just sits over the top and it nestles on there perfectly, so it's easy to take on and off. What you're going to do is just watch this now daily, and really all you should have to do is make sure that that pot, the interior pot, has moisture in it, has water in it, so that it can continue to permeate through the clay into the vermiculite, but also evaporate and fill the air. So a really simple, really easy way to do some propagation at home. And again, I think propagation is one of the most fulfilling, most satisfying things if you're a plant person. So go ahead and try it. Don't be afraid to fail. And if you do, keep trying. There's a lot of really wonderful things that you can do and create. And if you're already full on plants, it's not a bad thing to propagate some and give them to your friends. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you're willing to try doing some of your own home propagation. And we'll talk to you next time.